Imagine waking up one day to find bulldozers building an entire neighborhood on your land, and no one believes you own it. Instead of stopping them, you let them finish. 96 homes, paved roads, even a park. But when the HOA tried to claim it all, you walked into court, pulled out the original deed, and turned their dream neighborhood into your victory. For years, my land sat quietly at the edge of town, forgotten by almost everyone except me. 43 acres of rough soil and tangled weeds stretching out under the wide blue sky. It wasn't much to look at, just a patch of earth that most people saw as worthless. Developers had passed it up for decades, saying it was too rocky, too far from the main road, too expensive to connect to the city's utilities. But for me, that land carried a memory. My grandfather bought it after coming home from the war, dreaming it would one day become a family legacy. My father never did anything with it, and when he passed, it became mine. I kept it the way it was, peaceful, untouched, and full of promise. Then, one quiet summer morning, I noticed something strange. A low rumble echoed across the field. When I looked out, I saw a line of trucks creeping along the dirt road, bulldozers, cement mixers, and workers in bright vests. At first, I thought they were working on the neighboring property. Maybe someone finally decided to build there. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the machines crossing the fence line. My fence line. They were on my land, cutting down trees and clearing brush like they owned the place. I drove out to the field, dust flying behind me, and stopped beside a group of workers. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's going on here?" One man looked up from his clipboard, confused. "You must be the developer," he said. "We're breaking ground for Maple Ridge Estates. You want to check the layout?" I blinked, trying to process what he just said. "Maple Ridge Estates? I don't know what you're talking about," he frowned. "It's the new housing project. 96 homes. It's all in the plan." And then he walked off, leaving me standing there in disbelief, staring at the piles of dirt and freshly cut trees scattered across land that had been in my family for generations. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The next morning, I drove straight to the county office to look up the property records. When I gave the clerk my address, she pulled out a thick folder labeled Maple Ridge HOA Development. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Blueprints, survey maps, building permits, and all stamped and approved. And right there, clear as day, my land was marked as part of the new development. Someone had drawn the boundary lines straight through my property, cutting it into neat little parcels labeled Lot 41 through Lot 63. Each one had a price tag and a buyer listed. But there was one thing missing from the paperwork: my name. I remember whispering to myself, "This can't be real." When I asked the clerk how this could happen, she shrugged. "Developers submit plats all the time. Sometimes mistakes happen, but this wasn't a mistake. Someone had taken my land and turned it into a neighborhood, without ever asking, calling, or even notifying me. As I drove home, I passed those trucks again, still working, still tearing into the soil my grandfather once walked on. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and deep down, I felt something burning, not anger yet, but something heavier. Something told me this was only the beginning. A few days later, I returned to the county office, determined to find out how deep this mess went. I asked to see every record tied to the Maple Ridge Estates project. Zoning applications, permits, ownership transfers, everything. The clerk hesitated, clearly unsure if she was even allowed to hand them over. But after showing her my deed and proof of ownership, she slid a thick stack of papers across the counter. I sat down at a nearby table and began flipping through page after page. The more I read, the colder I felt. Somehow the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, a group I'd never even heard of, had filed documents claiming ownership of my land. They'd used a survey map that completely redrew the boundary lines, swallowing up nearly all 43 acres and listing them under their subdivision. They even named streets: Willowbrook Lane, Aspen Court, and Maple Ridge Drive. The strangest part was the list of signatures. There were developers, county inspectors, and board members, and at the bottom of one page, a signature that was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. Someone had forged my name. My hands trembled as I flipped through the rest. Every step of the process, the zoning approval, the environmental checks, even the construction permits, had been stamped and cleared as if everything was legitimate. The county had no reason to question it because all the paperwork looked perfect. I decided to confront the people behind it directly. After a few calls, I tracked down the HOA office, a brand new building in the middle of the construction site. When I walked in, the air smelled like paint and fresh carpet. Behind a glass desk sat a man with neatly combed hair and a confident grin. "You must be Richard Coleman," I said. He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "That's me. And you are?" "I'm the owner of the land you're building on." For a moment his smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Ah, you must be mistaken. Maple Ridge Estates is fully approved. The land belongs to our development company." I dropped my folder on his desk, letting the papers slide out. "No, Richard, it doesn't. The title still lists my name. This is my property. And you're trespassing." He glanced at the documents, then chuckled softly. "Look, there's probably been a mix-up with the county records. These things happen all the time. But we can work it out later. Right now, halting construction would cost millions and nobody wants that headache." His casual tone made my blood boil. He was talking like it was just a minor inconvenience, like I was in the way of his little empire. "I'm not agreeing to anything," I said firmly. "Of course," he replied smoothly, as if I hadn't spoken. "Let's keep communication open. We'll reach out soon." But I could tell by the way he avoided my eyes that he had no intention of fixing anything. To him, I was just an obstacle. One he probably assumed would give up once things got complicated. That night, I called a property lawyer, and together we started digging. After hours of research, he called me, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You're not going to like this," he said. "The HOA and the developers think they own your land. But legally they don't. The deed was never transferred. Every single home they're building, every foundation they've laid, sits entirely on your property." For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. The absurdity of it hit me all at once. They'd built roads, poured concrete, and even sold lots to buyers, all without ever holding the legal title. "They're digging their own hole," my lawyer said quietly. "If we act now, we can stop construction." But I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window at the distant glow of the construction lights flickering across my land. Trucks moved back and forth carrying materials and dreams built on someone else's soil. "No," I finally said. "Let them finish." My lawyer was silent for a moment. "You sure about that?" "Absolutely," I said. "If they think they can take what's mine, let's see how far they're willing to go. When the time's right, we'll show them who really owns Maple Ridge Estates." And with that, the plan began to form. A quiet, patient revenge that would hit them harder than any stop order ever could. Over the next few weeks, I thought about little else. Every time I drove past the land, I saw new changes. Piles of bricks, rows of pipes, the framework of houses rising from the earth that had once been quiet pasture. It was surreal. The sound of hammers echoed where crickets used to sing. Heavy machinery replaced the rustle of wind through the weeds. My family's land was transforming before my eyes, and not by my hand. My lawyer called often, urging me to take legal action. "If we wait too long, it might complicate the case," he warned. "You could lose leverage." But I had a different kind of leverage in mind. I knew that every wall they raised, every road they paved was money, their money, being invested into my land. And when the time came, that would be my greatest weapon. So I kept quiet. I didn't protest. I didn't contact the county. I didn't even show up on site again. I just watched from a distance week after week as the development grew. Soon, roads began to form. The dusty trail that once led to my old wooden fence was now a neatly paved street, lined with shiny lampposts and freshly planted trees. I'd drive by slowly sometimes, keeping my window cracked just enough to hear the chatter of workers. Lot 14's foundations, done. Lot 27's ready for framing. Closing's in 2 months if we stay on schedule. They spoke like they owned the place, and maybe they believed they did. But I had a copy of the original deed locked in my safe, yellowed, stamped, and signed by my grandfather himself. The county might have been fooled by paperwork, but the real proof was sitting quietly in my hands. After a year, Maple Ridge Estates started showing up in local news. "The fastest-growing luxury community in the county," one article read. The HOA held open houses and invited potential buyers for tours. Families walked the sidewalks admiring the model homes. Realtors called it a dream neighborhood with mountain views and family charm. They had no idea they were standing on someone else's property. My friends thought I was insane for staying silent. "You're letting them steal millions from you," one of them shouted over the phone. "Not stealing," I replied calmly. "Borrowing." By the second year, every lot had a home in progress. Street signs went up, mailboxes were installed, and the first residents began to move in. The HOA even sent out flyers announcing a community barbecue on my land. But what truly amazed me was how deep the illusion ran. The HOA collected fees, the developers made profits, and the homeowners paid mortgages, all for property that wasn't legally theirs. It was a house of cards built on the wrong foundation, and I was the one holding the missing piece. During that time, I made sure everything was airtight on my end. I kept up with property taxes, renewed my land title verification, and even recorded updated survey data with my lawyer. Every legal thread tied back to one undeniable fact. I was the sole owner of the land beneath Maple Ridge Estates. There were nights when I doubted myself, when the thought of waiting another month made me restless. Watching hundreds of people live their lives on land that was rightfully mine wasn't easy, but then I'd remember Richard Coleman's smug grin the day he dismissed me, telling me they'd work it out later, so I waited, and by the end of the second year, when the last roof tile was laid and the final house stood complete, I knew the time had come. The HOA had just celebrated the grand completion of their 96th home, complete with ribbon cutting, speeches, and smiling families. They thought the hard part was over. For me, it was just beginning. The morning of the court hearing was gray and quiet. I remember standing outside the courthouse, watching the mist drift off the parking lot, thinking how strange it was that something so massive could have started so silently. Just a few trucks rumbling onto my land one morning. Now it had come to this, a full courtroom, reporters with cameras, and almost 100 homeowners holding their breath over something none of them even knew about until a few weeks earlier. When the clerk called my name, I walked in with my lawyer by my side. Across the aisle sat Richard Coleman and the entire Maple Ridge HOA board. They looked polished, confident, like people who were used to getting their way. Richard met my eyes for a moment and smirked, like he was watching a show he'd already seen the ending to. The judge entered and the room went quiet. My lawyer began by explaining the basics, the land in question, the false transfer, and the forged signature. Then he opened a large manila envelope and pulled out the document that had been waiting for this day. The original deed, decades old, signed by my grandfather and properly recorded. "This," my lawyer said clearly, "is the original deed to the property now known as Maple Ridge Estates. The land was never sold, never transferred, and remains under my client's ownership. Every structure, every home, every road built there exists entirely on land that legally belongs to him." You could hear a pin drop. The HOA's attorney immediately jumped up. "Your Honor, this can't be accurate." The development was approved by the county. All permits were issued properly. The judge frowned and motioned for him to sit. "Permits don't override ownership," she said. "If the land wasn't legally transferred, those homes are sitting on private property that doesn't belong to the HOA or the developers." Richard shifted in his seat, his confident smirk starting to fade. He leaned over to whisper to his attorney, flipping through a binder of paperwork. The more pages he turned, the paler he got. My lawyer handed the judge a stack of documents showing property tax payments under my name for every year the construction took place. We also showed the forged signature used in the transfer documents. The county had verified it was fraudulent. "Your Honor," my lawyer continued, "the HOA not only built without authorization, but they also sold lots to homeowners under false pretenses. The true owner received no compensation, no notice, and no consent. This is not a misunderstanding. It's theft, done under the cover of bureaucracy." The judge took her time reading the documents. The silence stretched on for minutes. Finally, she set the papers down, looked directly at Richard, and said, "Mr. Coleman, do you understand what this means? You built an entire housing development on land you do not own." Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His attorney stammered something about clerical errors and bad communication, but it was clear to everyone. In that room, they were trapped. The homeowners sitting behind the defense side looked terrified. Many of them whispered to each other, asking if their homes would be taken away. A woman in the second row started crying quietly. I didn't blame them. They weren't the villains in this story. They were victims too. The judge finally spoke again. This court finds the plaintiff to be the rightful owner of the land comprising the Maple Ridge Estates development. The HOA and associated developers are hereby found liable for unauthorized construction, misrepresentation, and fraudulent land use. It was over. Richard's face turned ashen. His empire, the one he'd built with forged papers and arrogance, had just crumbled in front of everyone. Reporters began scribbling notes. The homeowners looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Some seemed angry, others desperate. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper. For the first time in years, the weight I'd been carrying, the frustration, the silence, the doubt, lifted. My lawyer turned to me and said quietly, "You did the right thing waiting." They hung themselves with their own rope, but I wasn't smiling. I knew the hardest part was still ahead. What to do next, wondering what to do with those 96 homes sitting on my land. That was a decision I couldn't make lightly. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, and I had both in my hands. In the weeks that followed the court ruling, the entire county buzzed with the story. Newspapers ran headlines like "HOA loses 96 homes after land ownership scandal," and "The man who owned an entire neighborhood." Reporters camped outside my driveway for days, hoping I'd give an interview. I didn't. I wasn't interested in fame. I just wanted what was fair. But the situation was complicated. Nearly 100 families were living in those homes now. Kids played on the sidewalks. People had moved their lives, their savings, and their dreams into Maple Ridge Estates. They didn't know their mortgages were tied to properties that legally didn't exist, and while part of me wanted to see the HOA pay for what they'd done, another part of me couldn't stomach the thought of tearing apart so many innocent lives. So I sat down with my lawyer again. We spent hours discussing options: eviction, resale, settlements, or long-term leases. Finally, I said, "I don't want to take their homes, but I do want them to know the truth, and I want the ones responsible to pay for it." We drafted an offer. I would sell the land to the HOA at full market value, not a penny less. Every homeowner could stay right where they were. No disruption, no eviction. But the money would come from the HOA's accounts and the developer's insurance, not from the residents themselves. If they refused, I'd retain ownership and lease the land back to the community, meaning the HOA would have to pay me annual fees just to exist. Either way, they would make it right. When the offer reached the HOA, chaos erupted. Several board members resigned immediately. Richard Coleman, the man who'd smirked at me all those months ago, tried to fight it at first, insisting the valuation was too high. But he had no ground to stand on, not legally, not morally. When the full scale of the fraud came out, Richard's reputation imploded. He was voted out of the HOA, sued by the other members, and eventually charged for falsifying documents. The developers who partnered with him were also dragged into investigations for misconduct and property fraud. It took months of back and forth, court filings and tense meetings, but eventually, a deal was reached. The HOA, now under new leadership, paid me millions in restitution and land value. The court ensured that the payment wouldn't fall on the homeowners. Their mortgages were restructured, their titles corrected, and the land was officially transferred under proper documentation. This time with my signature. I can't describe the feeling the day it was finalized. Relief, pride, and a strange sense of calm all mixed together. For 2 years I'd watched strangers build lives on my family's land, thinking it was gone forever. But in the end, I didn't just get it back. I made sure it was done right. One afternoon, I drove through Maple Ridge Estates for the first time since it had all ended. The streets were clean and quiet. Children rode their bikes in circles, their laughter echoing down the road. A few of the neighbors waved, unaware that the man driving past was the reason they still had homes to live in. At the far end of the neighborhood, there was a small open lot, the last piece of land that hadn't been developed. I decided to keep it for myself. I built a small bench under the big oak tree that had somehow survived all the construction. It stood like a witness to everything that had happened. The lies, the patience, the victory. Sometimes I sit there in the evenings listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. The sprinklers, the distant chatter, the hum of life that once seemed impossible. People often say revenge is best served cold, but I learned something different. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's patience, truth, and time. Because in the end, I didn't just win a lawsuit. I protected my grandfather's dream. I turned a stolen piece of land into a story that would be told for years. A reminder that no matter how powerful someone seems, they can't take what isn't theirs. Now, when I drive past the entrance sign that still reads "Welcome to Maple Ridge Estates," I can't help but smile. They may have built the homes, but it was my land, my legacy, that built their entire world. And that's how one quiet landowner outsmarted an entire HOA, with patience, proof, and perfect timing. He didn't need bulldozers or shouting matches. Just one piece of paper was enough to bring a multi-million-dollar empire crashing down. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more real-life revenge and courtroom twist stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens when power, pride, and property collide.